introduced the Reverend Chris McCreight. Chris is the chaplain at Hiram College and serves the Church of Christian Church, anyways, the Disciples Church. I only know denominations, I don't know the names of the congregations, but the Disciples Church that's right across from the campus, which is a beautiful little, sweet building. I love old churches. And he came and gave a little talk to our congregation last summer, I think it was, and I was so, there's several members here, but it was so interesting and so helpful to really understand the present moment that I said, hey, this would be great for a league all-member meeting, and wouldn't it be cool if we could invite the community? And look at you, the community showed up, right? This is awesome. So I'm going to stop talking so that Reverend Chris can start talking.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Oh, that was nice. Just felt like church right there. So I'm going to try with this, and apologies too. I'm going to keep my coat on. I start running cold about October. So thank you for your presence tonight. Thank you for showing up for the League of Women Voters. Very grateful to them for all the work that they do here in Portage County. And also for facilitating conversations like this that hopefully have the potential to lead to further discussion, further engagement, and just, again, broader and better opportunities to engage our whole communities and work towards a very full, representative, inclusive democracy. So, as Renee mentioned, I came here a few months ago and kind of talked with the congregation of the Unitarian Universalists about ways to understand, and also we looked at a couple of ways of kind of being neighbors with, and also trying to understand how to approach, to engage, and perhaps kind of work with and transform white Christian nationalism. Here tonight, the direction I'm kind of taking is about understanding it as a form of what it is within the tradition, and also how it impacts some of the work that the League of Women Voters is really attentive to, such as, again, full representation. So I like to tell stories, and hopefully there are a couple of stories that we can kind of tell together maybe here, to get a good idea of the tradition and where, again, understanding white Christian nationalism falls in, stands with, or against, perhaps, the tradition. So, do you understand? Do you know who this is? This is a part of the story of Jesus in the wilderness. And so there is a time, it's in the earliest gospel of Mark, so the earliest gospel within the New Testament, that is Mark, and Jesus is baptized and then is ushered out into the wilderness, and there is tempted in the desert for 40 days. And the first temptation is, do we know? After 40 days, you start getting hungry. So this is a representation here of the devil who comes to Jesus and says, hey, you are apparently the Son of God, and if you are, then you can turn this stone into bread, eat, you will be satisfied. And Jesus turns him down. Yeah. Second temptation in the wilderness is power. The tempter takes Jesus up to a point where they can look over all the kingdoms of the earth. He says, I can give you all this power, all this control. All you have to do is sell your soul. Jesus says, no. The last one, taken up to the top pinnacle of the temple, says, hey, throw yourself down, you won't get hurt. And becomes, right? And Jesus says, this whole idea of the ability to control God, for me to tell God what God should or should not do, probably not. So this is a story that comes through. This is overture to the Gospels, and this is kind of demonstrative of the Gospel itself, right? It is something that's going to be turning against these temptations of control and power and accumulation. And this is going to be central to Jesus and to the gospel. And so those who are coming in to follow Jesus, understood as the disciples, are going to be followed in a way that is right in line with all of this, right? Turning away from accumulation, turning away from power, turning away from control, and seeking something different. And all of this is not necessarily new. It's part of an inheritance that Jesus has. So here is another story. The beginning of Judaism begins in the Exodus. And so this is by Frank Wesley, so it's wonderful. And this is, anybody? This is Moses. Moses is placed in a basket, floated down the river. And why is this happening? Is this because his mom is just thinking, you know what? I want a future whitewater rafter? No. It's the conditions that Moses' family and everybody else was in within the Egyptian empire. So it's persecuting the lowly, it's enslaving the lowly. So there's a story then of a beginning of liberation to this. Moses is summoned here by a burning bush, is told to go and tell Moses to let my people go. Let Pharaoh say, let my people go. Pharaoh says no, suffering continues, the oppression continues, plagues come, but then there is this liberation from empire. And this is John August Swanson, if you like this word as much as I do. And so out of Egypt, out from empire, out from bondage, through the waters, liberation and a new beginning. This is the new beginning that is a covenantal community, and what we understand within the giving of the law at Sinai and the laws that come forward from that, these laws are to design a community, to design a nation that will not be an empire. There'll be something different from what Egypt was, that will be able to sustain the freedom that they have been given. And so there's something that's good here. It begins with, this is how the tradition begins, right? From this point on, it is to move through the narrative and to see a beginning that is anti-imperial. And then the people in the nation form a kingdom. God doesn't want them to have a king, but the people really want to have a king, and so God relents and gives them a king. And then the narrative and the story are about suffering and injustice, often perpetrated by the king and the kingdoms, and how that results with division and then destruction. So the people, when we get to Jesus, the people of this tradition are subject to empires and conquests and exiles and occupations. This is the history inherited. This is the lived experience of Jesus of Nazareth as it comes to being born in Roman occupation. And so here is from Dr. Matthew Taylor, a tablet inscription talking about how in this particular time of the Roman Empire we have a Lord, and that Lord is Caesar Augustus. There is good news, a gospel according to Caesar that is to put forward the ways that produce and sustain an empire. There's the gospel of Caesar. And then as we see within the New Testament, there's the gospel of Jesus. These are to be in contrast with each other. That's how it begins. Just as the Exodus movement was anti-imperial, so too is the gospel of Jesus to be anti-imperial, to form a different way, to form a different community. And so the gospel according to Jesus is in contrast with the gospel according to Caesar. It is compassion and service versus power and domination. It is equity and humility versus hierarchy and control. Abundance versus scarcity and hoarding. Following the way, following the gospel of Jesus has the potential to co-create something known as the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, that is then perhaps better interpreted as the empire of God, or the empire of heaven. This is a means of resistance to and transformation of the power of Rome. It is a sacramental community shaped by inclusion, that is multi-ethnic, shaped by care, shaped by generosity, shaped by humility, shaped by justice. So we can have, right, here's the icon, the image of. You can have an empire built in, sustained by the image of Caesar, understood to be divine. Or you can have an empire of God shaped by the one who is service here, serving, not being served. You can have here the Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, of the emperor, the high priest. Or you can have an image of a community that is equal, like at a table. It's like a round table like this one, which is also very beautiful. John August Swanson. So this begins with contrast. The kingdom of God concept, though, does not long last necessarily in contrast or in tension. So it remains for a time, but then it encounters a resistance, in part due to persecution from Rome and the question of theodicy, in part due to an unfulfilled hope of a return of Jesus and a complete transformation of the world. So understandings evolve to imagine the empire of God less as something that is right here and now and something that is beyond the earth and perhaps even beyond this life. And so an emphasis shifts from an ethic of communal salvation to a priority of individual salvation for heaven, with varying emphases of orthopraxy, right belief. Right practice, and orthodoxy, right belief. So church authorities, they debate and they determine these creeds to formally define and interpret the story of Jesus and Christianity, to compose a narrative of human sinfulness and divine sacrifice and reconciliation and union through right belief and right living, with a conviction of a final and a total conclusion. This is often how the story of Christianity is told now. And as the church becomes one with empires, we see less inclination to focus on right living and more on right belief, allowing professions of faith to justify all matters of violence and injustice and harm. This is part of our history. So it is to say again, maybe we should reconsider and say yes instead. So even through the Reformation, the dominant narrative of Christianity is one of human sinfulness and divine sacrifice and right belief as a means to salvation of a soul that will be complete in the future. So it's sounding, again, less earthly, less material, more future, more spiritual. Foundational ideals such as care and neighborliness, equity and justice, peace, they become secondary and even just forfeited to a future world. So this is a really fun way to move through the history of religion in the 4,000 years in about 10 minutes. General, very general. History of Christianity within America itself, I think this is something to acknowledge here. We're going to be talking about white Christian nationalism. This is not the only issue within the church. So the history of Christianity has also involved the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny, churches within colonies mandating creeds and excommunicating heretics, Christianity affirming enslavement of human beings, and distrust of other denominations. This continued right even through President Kennedy's campaign. We were worried about who would be in charge there. So it is a suitable question itself to even ask if Christianity as a whole is compatible with multiracial and pluralistic democracy. It's okay to ask that question. And white Christian nationalism is a particular threat to multiracial and pluralistic democracy that's worthy of understanding. And so again, this is, I think, Philip Koenig, and a more updated vision of what it would be to say yes. So white Christian nationalism is in America. Implicitly and explicitly embraces white supremacy. It embodies hierarchies of gender, race, and sexual orientation as divinely ordained. Everything is white. Jesus is white. It even pertains to Santa Claus, you'll hear that. Racism is even affirmed. It also looks like the embrace of traditional households, patriarchy, and traditional families that are heteronormative. They are affirmed as divinely ordained, the only suitable forms of relationship. And it is something that is incredibly hyper-individual, and capitalism has shaped this as well, because everything is transactional. The idea of transformational relationships is widely absent. It is also embracing of Christian supremacy. So other creeds among the church are suspect. Right? Orthodoxy is valued. Other religions are inferior and wrong. Suspicion of other denominations, scapegoating of other religions, and then others are often either viewed as souls in need of saving, or then souls in need of avoiding, or souls in need of eliminating. A morality is at play here, and that determines the view. But common is anti-Semitism and Islamophobia as well. And it also embraces an American exceptionalism, understanding this country as integral to God's plan of salvation. So within this, it is often in light of an understanding about how the world is to end, which often involves various readings of the book of Revelation, that there happens to be then understandings and tolerance and even desires for particular outcomes in other countries for the advancing of an ending. This is part of the detachment. This is part of the understanding of the image of God, that God is not here right now, but God needs something else to happen, needs everything to be in place, and then will come back. So I'll conclude with a couple of ideas here just about how this relates directly to the work that the League of Women Voters engages in. And then we'll deal with your questions if we want to expand the conversation wider. But really, one of the things that see this as far as impacting our democracy is that there's a suspicion of others and an unwavering trust of the right people, right? So there are ideas within this gospel that only some should vote, or some should be eligible to even hold power. And if you are so, fortunate, I guess, to be one of those who should be able to hold power, this particular gospel is willing to overlook a lot of corruption and injustice, because, again, there's often some idea of a greater goal in place. There's also a reliance upon hierarchies that are in order, and so this can and will influence the way that a household votes. So we have perhaps even seen some clips in the news recently of particular churches that embrace white Christian nationalism, wondering aloud whether or not it should just be up to the husband in the family to determine how everybody else votes. And again, another idea here about disenfranchisement, and then beyond that, more of a tolerance of the end justifying the means. So recognizing the diversity of conviction with any particular white Christian nationalist church. This is not a formal denomination. This is a concept of the gospel that kind of has its presence in a host of congregations, most of which are congregational or independent, lacking another authority outside of the congregation itself. But there is, even when we start to talk about some of the friction, the challenges, even potentially the dangers of this gospel and how it might influence our democracy together, there's still something worth elevating and kind of holding on to. The benefits of practicing democracy, albeit how challenging it might be. And so there's a wisdom presence that has yet to really kind of be engaged and practiced in a whole community. It's also to understand with empathy that the hierarchies that might be believed and subscribed to are not working for most. And it's to recognize that these folks are worthy of the benefits as well as the responsibilities of democracy itself. So this is kind of how I come to understand white Christian nationalism, that the entire tradition itself is within a season, within a wilderness. Due to many things. One is that a dominant narrative in theology often feels irrelevant. Declining membership and declining religious affiliation in the country, and declining influence. So white Christian nationalism is one response to all that. It's giving in, right, to all the temptations that we have seen before as should be antithetical to the gospel itself. But that's what feels like it has a power to work. And so when there's someone who's facing isolation, when there's somebody who's facing resentment, when there's somebody who's facing search for meaning and purpose, right? That speaks. There's a reason why these are the temptations, right? They're alluring. So it is to give themselves, the gospel is to give itself over to temptations. And we see as well some of what it has been willing to do, turning alienation into belonging, harnessing pain to create an energy, considering victory just to be the well-being of a select few, willing to condemn and abandon others, but it cannot endure. And it, in a multiracial, pluralistic democracy, cannot long endure. So the things that we do to practice multiracial, pluralistic democracy, they are what strengthens our multiracial, pluralistic democracy. They are what demonstrates to folks within white Christian nationalism that feel as though they need to have some control and that it can't be for everybody, it's got to be just for a few, that it can function. And if we, as we can, not only strengthen our democracy, but then even show that there's room and there's opportunity for their participation, then I think that we see the temptations fall away because people soon begin to realize what they are and how empty it is. So that's my understanding, that's my approach and hope, and I think that's maybe a worthy place to leave it right now, and then we'll get to some of your questions, because I know one of the things that y'all like to do is have this whole thing be done in an hour. I like that too. So I thank you very much for your listening and your engagement, and I look forward to